What's up, guys? Matt Medved here with Now Media. We've got a very special episode of Luminaries today. Our guest is Cameron Cates, the CEO and Executive Director of the ApeCoin Foundation. We're going to trace his whole journey from the corporate law side to being in-house at Yuga Labs to now running one of the most important blockchains in the Web3 culture space. So let's dive in. About like the art and culture scene here in Philly?
I think Philly's got such a good scene. I mean, so obviously with the art museum here, it actually has extension buildings over there. But what they've done that's really great is right down here on Benjamin Franklin Boulevard, like the Barnes Museum just opened up a couple years ago. And the Barnes Museum, I think it has like the highest concentration or the most Monets in the entire world.
Wow.
So it used to be, it was a guy who invented one of the vaccines, I forget which one, made a fortune back in the early 1900s. And he had a place outside the city, like a big mansion that he populated with all of his art. And then he turned it into a museum and he left money to run the museum. And it became this actually big legal case. Actually, you should look it up. There's a great documentary called The Art of the Steal.
I do know about
that. And so the city ended up suing to take possession of the collection, and it was like against his will, and a court had to decide like how long after you die does your will last. And well, the museum's right here, so we know who won.
Cam, great to have you here for Now Media in Philadelphia.
In Philly, baby.
Yeah, my first time back here in quite some time.
We're glad to have you coming down. I was able to suck you out of New York City for it.
It actually wasn't that bad. We were just talking about this, like Amtrak, like barely 90 minutes, really easy, had my workstation set up, all good to go.
Wi-Fi hold out?
I didn't even try. I used the hotspot, you know. Yeah.
Can't promise the Wi-Fi.
I couldn't even get it to connect, you know, but excited to dive in. This is actually the first video interview we've done for our Luminary series. So we're going to go deep. We're going to talk all things ape, but we're also going to get to know you as a person as well. So I'm really excited for it.
Pumped to be here. Really appreciate it again.
Amazing. Well, why don't we start at the beginning? Like, let's talk origin story. Let's go like the making of Cam.
July 4th, 1988.
Boom, there it is. July 4th. You're born on the 4th of July.
I was.
Wow.
I think it says a lot. Like in crypto, you can't wait. Same thing. I showed up 5 weeks early, stopped the parade to get to the hospital.
Wow. I was 2 weeks late. So we were we were real different in that regard. So tell me about your upbringing. Like, where'd you grow up? What was it like? What was your family life like?
Yeah. So I always say I grew up in Philly, but truth is my wife will call me out for it. I grew up in Jersey from a town called Cherry Hill. So it's like that typical suburb life, you know, grew up, lots of neighbors, friendly environment, bikes, sports, swim clubs, all that good stuff. For me as a kid, it was just like, how could I bounce a ball 24 hours a day? Basketball, soccer, baseball, tennis, I didn't care. And so from growing up, it was just sports 24/7, teams, loved it. You know, I feel like as I got older, it was just really focusing on like that competitive fire. And I think we'll get to a little bit on that competitive fire when it comes to, to the Web3 world here. But that was me in a nutshell, man. You just could not get me to stop bouncing the ball and trying to win.
Ooh, I like that. And I've been told that it's very dangerous to tread into the Philly sports topic with you. But just as a, like a little bit of an appetizer here, like who did you grow up being like cheering for?
Oh, I mean, it was Sixers number one, Allen Iverson. There will probably be a photo of me wearing the arm sleeve that he made famous, wearing the headband. Eagles, Don McNabb, that was my era. I went to his draft. I've told him to his face, I booed the heck out of him.
Wow.
I was chanting for Ricky Williams. Big regret. Thank you, Donovan, for all you did. It wasn't as big as baseball or hockey. Those are my two.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So let's talk about the early days of Cam. Obviously, your background is the legal field.
Yeah.
So how did you go from sort of like sports fan, doing all that, then make your decision that law was the path that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I kind of backed into it a little bit. My dad was a lawyer growing up, and he told me don't be a lawyer. And so, of course, as a pig-headed little kid, I was like, I'm gonna be a lawyer. And so when I was in college, I just trying to feel my way out. I went to Penn State. I was having a lot of fun, doing good enough in school, but maybe not the best as I could have. And
Mm.
so when you're starting to get ready to graduate, you're like, what am I going to do with my life? And you start looking at jobs. And I was like, none of these really seem that exciting. And I don't think they pay well enough. So, my brain, I was just like, what do I fall back on? And so I, started studying for the LSATs. Really lucky that standardized tests were kind of up my alley, and got to come back home, go to, University of Pennsylvania for law school, and then sort of started on a trajectory from there.
Love that. I also like standardized tests always bailed me out,
Thanks. Appreciate them making it easy. You got a 1 in 4 shot at worst.
There it is. Well, I have a law degree that I'm not really using very much right now, but I can appreciate, the rigors of not only studying for the LSAT, that, but also like the 1L year and like law school life. Like, what was that like for you?
I kind of loved law school. I remember growing up in school and feeling like it just felt like teachers are like saying stuff to me and I just had to regurgitate it. And that wasn't the worst thing for studying, but I really loved that debate feeling. And so when you get to law school, you get what you ask for. Like that teacher, teachers there using the Socratic method, like they will go in on you. But I don't know, I sort of found it fascinating. And so, it just sort of kicked something up. And I felt like maybe that's kind of where I did my best, in school. For the first time, I felt like I was really maxing out, what my potential was. And you find out that like the law isn't what you think it was, right? Growing up. I mean, you would have experienced this. Like, it's not just sitting around in a courtroom and debating. Like it's not just arguing until someone says you're right and you're wrong. There's so much nuance. And so really learning those levels, learning how to sort of ratchet up, learning how to find angles. I mean, that was what was really interesting about it to me.
Absolutely. I remember, so for me, when I went to law school, I was always looking at the international law, the NGO route. So a little bit different than like the traditional big law path, all that. And I found 1L to be pretty challenging because, you have for those who don't know, with 1L, you have pretty much a set curriculum, whereas like later on, you get to kind of choose your courses and do the things that interest you. And I remember like, I was doing torts and I was like, I have like no desire to learn this, I was like, but I loved like constitutional law, criminal law, super interesting. And then obviously 2L and 3L, I was able to like really hone in on the international stuff. What was like, when you went into law school, did you know the path that you wanted, or were you kind of like feeling it out and exploring?
I kind of was like you, actually. I just had this belief that I like wanted to be an international arbitrator. I don't actually know what that means. Like, I still don't know what that means.
Yeah.
But in my head, I thought it sounded cool. I was going to work on all these important things. I was going to travel for it. And I got to take a class on it and I was not good at it, actually. So quickly I was like, hey, maybe I should try something a little different. And, for me, then I started thinking about like, well, what is interesting? And, that was at a time, early internet, or like sort of mid-aught internet. Like you started seeing the rise of some of the giants. You were seeing a lot of like, how technology was changing, how we experience business, how businesses interact with us. You started to see the massive boom in private equity and M&A. And I was like, this is actually really interesting. And so I just started taking classes around that. And, by the time I graduated, I sort of knew corporate law was my path.
Yeah. And so take me kind of through that. Like, are there any moments from law school that really stand out as like really formative for you when you look back on your career path? Or
it's a good question. My first 24-hour final, I think, was the first time I cried during a test.
Oh, those are brutal.
You get 24 hours. There's no limits. You can sort of use any resource under the sun. And that's just how you know the test is super hard.
Yeah.
And shout out to Kermit Roosevelt from Con Law. Like, he tested me to my limit. But I just felt like that was that first time where you're like, I have no choice but to do this. And that felt like such a kick in the butt a little bit, to be like, you got to sometimes just figure out how to get it going. And like from there, I think law school started to get a little easier, where you can sort of lean back and be like, I can do this when the going sort of gets a little hard. And then I think some later classes, like, you find just surprising interests. I took a class on, the sort of the legal ramifications of like the Holocaust. And like, as a Jewish person myself, like, growing up, having a sense of that, having a sense of the importance of it, I didn't have any clue the legal regime that was applied. It was the first time the concept of international law was even sort of applied at a global scale. And you sort of are like, it opened my eyes to some of like the questions that really underpin how we operate today. And when you start to think at like sort of that macro level, but you still have to sort of, handle the details, like it just stretches you. And I feel like that growth moment, I just never really look back from it.
No, I love that. I love that. Can definitely empathize from the
NGO,
journey.
yeah.
So okay, you graduate, and that's kind of a high pressure period for many people, especially looking to do corporate law, right? It's very competitive. Obviously, the whole bell curve thing, like the GPAs matter.
Don't remind me.
Yeah, of course. So like, when you graduated, where did you have your sights set? How did that all play out?
Yeah, I was lucky enough at the end of 1 year, the law school had done a great job bringing in law firms to interview us and give us a chance to get internships for our 2 year. It was coming out of the recession. So like this was just after the 08, 09. It was like 2012. The market hadn't really come back yet. So there was a lot of pressure. Law school was real expensive. I'm sure it's crazy now. I don't even want to know. But it was really expensive then. And, these law firms are dangling like a high paying internship.
Right.
And you just feel that desperation to do it. And so I was super lucky. I ended up with interning at Latham & Watkins, which has just turned into the most incredible law firm. But even then, you sort of had that feeling that like I was going to be set up for a really good opportunity. And lucky enough, that 2L internship turned into my first job.
Wow, there it is.
Yeah. Lipstick building in New York, Midtown for you.
Boom. There we go. Okay. Now we're in the New York era, right?
In the New York
we're in the New York era. So what was that like for you, kind of moving up there and getting into like the big law life,
It was just such a change. Like I grew up suburban life, very big bubble.
Yeah.
I went to Penn State, big bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Law school, you kind of like stuck in a little bubble. It's a pretty inward experience. And so like going up to the city, it was, and like sort of joining like my first job really.
Yeah.
I had never worked at that scale. You kind of like a little caught off guard, So I was lucky I was living with my best friend who actually graduated from Harvard and was going to Skadden and, was going through the same thing as me, which helped. Like you could commiserate like the first night that you like, it's midnight and someone's like, need you to come back to the office. And you're like, oh, okay, I'll be right there. Or the first weekend when you're like, you had plans and it's like, cancel those plans, the deal's going. So those early days were a bit of a struggle until you sort of get your footing as to like what is the world in that setting expecting of you.
Totally. Like, I never did the big law route, but I a lot of friends who did.
Yeah.
And, they talk about like the long nights, the endless hours, like, you need to have this fixed and done in like, this very short time period.
Totally.
What were some of those kind of like crazy experiences for you?
Yeah, I mean, my first deal, like you're there, it's 2 weeks, you get an email being like, hey, you've been staffed on a deal. You've never even talked to the partner before. The partner doesn't even talk to you. It's the senior associate. And they're like, it's $1 billion acquisition, start.
Right.
And you're like, but what do you want me to start on? You don't even have a clue. And so you just end up just plowing through it. You do dozens of hours straight of diligence and you're just trying to figure out, what am I looking for? And you're asking questions to learn. And it's like, it's just such a fire hose, but for me, that worked. Like that fire hose, you take it all in, you suck it all up, and you get better each day.
Were you largely focused on M&A?
I did. So I had that image like Wall Street. I was going to wear like a pinstripe suit. Totally. I was going to be in the Wall Street Journal. I was going to be able to tell my mom. I never got the pinstripe suit or my name in the journal, but like some of my deals made it there. And my mom at least, put those on the fridge.
I love that. So that must have been interesting for you because, obviously thinking almost like some foreshadowing with, your eventual career arc, like what did working in M&A, the legal side of it, kind of give you insight into sort of like corporate business? And
yeah, you start to learn why are decisions being made the way they are. How do companies start to evaluate risks? What are the areas that a company cares about? How does that differ from a strategic buyer, from a private equity buyer, from like a leveraged buyout perspective? You start to sort of piece together like what makes the business move. And like, even though the M&A deals themselves, a lot of time the paperwork seems similar. A lot of times, the pace is very similar. So you do feel a little bit of the groundhog's movement. If you have a chance to be perceptive to it, you actually can learn a lot from like your clients. And thankfully I had a lot of amazing clients who like, if you asked a question, even if it was a little bit of like off legal topic, more just like, hey, I'm just interested. A lot of them took the time and like, I'm super lucky for that.
What was the trajectory like at Latham and then towards like, your next career step?
Yeah. At Latham's right on that lockstep, first years, second years, it's a, it's a bit of that escalator. You just keep going up it as long as you're performing. You got to face the music. If you're not, they're definitely, big law isn't a place where if you're not performing, you're going to, be there long. But for me, like after like a year, I was sort of feeling like M&A didn't give me all of the excitement that I wanted. Like I was really gravitating towards that business side, like why were decisions being made? And I was really lucky. I had a partner, Vivian Mays, and for some reason she sees this podcast. Hey to Vivian, she changed sort of my trajectory. She offered me to join this deal that was a joint venture, actually, first one, and it was a play between Credit Suisse and Palantir. Trying to use big data to identify abnormalities in trading activity. And I felt like the regulatory angle of that, the corporate angle of like, why would a big bank join a big data company? The commercial angle of like, how do they share economics? How do they split risks? To me, that was, an entire new chessboard to play. And so I, loved doing that deal. And from there, I was like, Vivian, tell me whatever you want. And she basically came back. She's like, do you know anything about ICOs? And that's the start.
There it is. There it is. So what year was that? That was like
end of 2016.
So right in the era.
I always tell people that was the era that like I lived in New York. I had to like take the train into Jersey to log into Coinbase because I was like still blocked in New York City. And like I wasn't smart enough to get I should have just gotten a VPN. Like, but
there's something endearing about that though, Instead
I literally took the train to buy Ethereum.
Wow. There it is. Yeah. What do you remember like the price of Ethereum the first time that you got it?
Oh God. First time I bought it, I was seconded to Credit Suisse. My buddies and I were all talking. It was the week that it went from like, or 2 weeks that it went from like 9 to 72.
That was a big deal.
And
huge deal.
It was a huge,
I remember that.
Huge week. Yeah. And all my buddies bought it 9. And I bought it 72.
Yeah. What does they say? You buy it at the price you deserve,
They're
right?
hedge fund guys. They figured it out before I did. I should have just listened.
Hey, but it's one of those things, like even, at 72, you're like, oh, it's so high now, right? Like, but like everything's so relative, right?
Well, and then it went up to, what was it, like 400 that cycle, I think, and then came right back down.
Right back down.
And, I had like student loans. I was like, trying to make the right financial decisions. And that first crash, I mean, being in crypto as long as you have, like you've seen the cycles, you've seen people get wiped out. It's hard to swallow, man.
Oh
like,
yeah.
When you realize you're like, I lost money, like more than my allowance for sure.
Oh,
painful.
100%. I remember. So I bought Bitcoin in 2013. I was the top signal. Like I bought it $900. Got my dad to buy one. Crashed like 2 weeks later. 250 in the red for 4 years. I have a very close buddy. I still have the email from him. We were just talking about the other day. Still the email from him in like 2012 where he's like, hey guys, I just bought 3 things from Bitcoin from this company, Mt. Gox. And literally famous last words sometimes. Yeah.
So I think he recovered. I'm not sure.
That's good.
But that was like 2012, like my first year of law school. And it was like, Bitcoin was like 125.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm sitting here like, instead I was buying Wawa for lunch.
Yeah. But it's interesting that like you mentioned that first crash, right? Like one thing I think is pretty interesting is that, after Bitcoin crashed, like I'd love to say that I like double, triple down, right? But and I mean, I still hold that Bitcoin, to say, but you get shaken by that first crash. It like really, even if you have conviction, it really shakes you. And I actually think, the NFT space has, you really need is kind of still in that sort of PTSD from the first crash, because it wasn't until that next rise, that next cycle with Ethereum taking off, where I was like, okay, I was onto something, that my belief has been validated. Obviously I should have gone deeper during harder during the bear, but like now I'm really into this. I feel like we're still kind of waiting for that return, You
use that word validation. It's so key here, because no matter how much conviction you have, I mean, except for like certain traders that are just a different type of animal who just believe in themselves to the end. A lot of us need validation. We need to feel like we made the right call. And I think there's a lot, there's been plenty of cycles in crypto where you can make a lot of wrong calls. And then that starts to shake like, well, is it the individual call that I'm good at? Is it my belief in crypto generally? And so which one is being validated? We're talking about just Bitcoin. And it's like, but I'm sure you made a lot of other trades we're not talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And we're going to forget
many
about
I don't want to remember,
many of those that we just want to sort of set aside.
Exactly.
I didn't really believe in that one. I just was checking. I was throwing it out there.
Yeah. No, it's definitely the case.
Yeah.
All right. So, it's 2016, 2017. You find out about ICOs
Yep.
from Vivian. Like, what does that look like? Did you start working in that space at all? Or-
Yeah.
yeah.
So we had a couple really great clients. They were doing
Yeah.
ICOs, but working for a big law firm, they were like, we're going to do these as regulated securities offerings. So
Right.
ironically, I still called them ICOs, but these were like full 506, regulated offerings, maybe Reg S if it was international. So I was still treating it from the legal side, like the very specific legal lens, whereas the rest of the world, I mean, that 2017 ICO cycle, we saw some wild
That got
times.
wild. Yeah.
I think the EOS founder just bought like $125 million compound. I
Saw
but
that.
like
Yeah.
2017 comes back and reminds you a couple times a year.
Yeah.
It was a real deal. But so I started doing that work, and like I just thought, again, it was just like working with clients that I found what they were doing to be more interesting. And so I was lucky, like Latham, there was a couple great partners there that were doing this work and then would continue to work with crypto companies. And I was lucky enough to work on those deals. And over like 3 or 4 years, as I sort of got older in the firm, I just kept wanting more and more of that work. But, working at a big firm, there's a balance between what clients will the firm take on, versus the size and value they are to the firm. And so, after like 4 years, I sort of said to myself, I'm not sure if New York's my home. I don't know if, the work is ever going to be what I want it to be. And so my wife and I, we came back to Philly, and I joined a law firm here to work for a partner who's like, blockchain is my thing. And so then I finally that was the first time I was like, okay, I'm a blockchain lawyer now. I'm not going to do M&A unless it's in the blockchain space. I'm not going to do cap markets unless it's in the blockchain space.
What year was that?
I started at that firm on Monday of March 11th, I think. And Friday, March 15th, we were all sent home for 2 weeks for this thing called COVID.
Oh, wow. Okay. So 2020.
And I never went back into the office.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
Yeah.
So what gave you the conviction at that time to like stake your career essentially on the blockchain?
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Sometimes you make moves because you just feel like, even if it's not going to be maybe the best financial move, you also you have to care about your career. I mean, we were talking before this about, some of the places you've been, and it's like, sometimes you're like, I don't want to spend my life doing work that I just don't care about or don't feel passionate for, or those clients aren't doing something that I'm interested in. And so it's kind of me trying to find that balance of how can I do something that I'm personally interested in and do the best that I can to like provide. And thankfully crypto hasn't gone away. And so, it's okay.
Yeah. So what was that next step like for you, especially against the backdrop of everything changing with COVID?
Well, that was crazy because all of a sudden every law firm, accounting firm, everyone was like, is the economy going to shut down? Is like business going to dry up? And it didn't. I mean, the government stepped in, the money, started printing again.
That's right.
Ended
up being very good for crypto.
Let's get that quantitative easing going, Jerome. And so all of a sudden the work was going, and that partner and I were doing a lot of blockchain work, but the firm was going through a merger, and they believed in fintech, but not necessarily crypto.
Yeah.
And so after a year, I said to the partner that I was working for, I was like, look, I gotta keep getting closer to the fire. And at that point, we were really at the high times of early 2021.
Right.
Crypto was booming. Like we had just had DeFi summer, and I was able to join Fenwick.
Boom.
Andy, Ryan, all those guys over there. And Andy, he was just like, if you want to do crypto 24/7, I'm your guy. And I said, let's do it.
I love that. Now, at that time, 2021, crazy bull run, NFTs are popping, everything's happening. Like you said, DeFi summer really, I think, set that up. How active were you like in trading in the space, just like doing your own things?
I think it's a good thing that I came in from the legal side because it gives me an excuse for never having been as like deep in it. And maybe my bank account would feel better had I been.
Right.
But like, I've always felt like I love the business side of it, but I'm not necessarily a trader.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know how to make all those moves. So I've been slow and steady in crypto. I played with the big boys.
A little DCA, a little DCA, a little compounding.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Played a little bit of, let me try something here. Let me try something there. Oops, I lost. It's okay. But that was like the Solana, like the first Solana era.
Yeah.
And like Fenwick like represented a lot of the Solana world.
Yeah.
So, for the first time, I had thinking ICOs, that was all Ethereum. Like that was really my first exposure to like Sol, which, you know, was a really interesting time given everything going on you know, in the industry there.
That's super interesting. And like during this era, like from the outside, obviously, what was your perspective on like the rise of Bored Ape Yacht Club and all of that?
I remember, you know, working at Fenwick. I think I'd started on like May 14th. So it was like 2 weeks after, you know, Apes minted out. And one of my colleagues, if he hears this, Jacob Whitman, shout out to him. He's now killing it at Plasma. He's like, hey man, I got these things. I got these apes. And I'm thinking, I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? You know, and that was like he was really the one who was like, hey, you should like look into these NFTs. And Joe Dole with Magic Eden GC, same thing. But Joe and I, Joe probably did way better than I did, but he was like, well, let's check out some Sol NFTs. So Trash Pandas, if you're listening, you were my first.
Galactic Geckos.
I still love you. I still have you, I think.
Yeah.
Trash Pandas.
Trash Pandas. Wow.
Should have got an ape.
All right, so this is all happening. You joined Fenwick, and you finally get to focus on crypto like 24/7. What was that like?
A whirl. Like you did, you know, like when you in the wintertime, you step outside, you take that first deep breath of cold air, and it's just like you can feel it. To me, that was how Fenwick felt. It was like that big first refreshing, you know, deep breath to be like, I know I loved this. Now I'm doing it. And that whole year, I mean, worked my tail off for sure, and I worked with incredible teams there, but like I got to work on anything and everything I thought was interesting in this space. We represented L1s, we represented exchanges, we represented NFT marketplaces, we represented, you know, DeFi protocols, we represented just some things that were front ends of DeFi protocols versus the actual protocol. We represented L2s, the early Arbitrum days, and you know, Steven and Harry and Ed and AJ over there. Like I really got to touch everything.
Wow.
And then, you know, early September, we get Andy calls me and he's like, hey, you remember those apes that Jacob was talking about? Well, I got a call with them. Do you want to join? And I was like, for sure. He's like, great. Their names are, you know, Gordon Goner, Gargamel, some of them Tomato, and No Sass. And I was like, okay, let's do it. I was like, are we going to learn their real names? She's like, I don't think we are. And so first Zoom, didn't know their names for sure.
Was video on or no?
I don't think it was.
Yeah.
I think maybe they turned it on at some point, but well, in the beginning of the call, it wasn't.
That's funny. That's funny. And so how did that call go? What came of it?
Yeah, we got to work with them from basically that day on. You know, I got to work with them, and that led to just some of the most, you know, outrageous, you know, moments of the NFT cycle. You know, obviously with the acquisition of CryptoPunks, you're a punk.
There it is.
You know, maybe we can get to that topic. I'll reverse course and ask you some questions.
I'll always game for it. You know what I mean?
You know, the acquisition of CryptoPunks, 2 weeks later, you know, the Series Seed round, a couple weeks later, you know, there was obviously the launch of ApeCoin. A couple weeks later was the other side. I mean, talk about a 2-month span, and I got to work with those guys on all of it. And like, I mean, talk about a high. That was wild. What
were some of like the standout moments from that, or like any interesting anecdotes? Because like that run for Yuga was crazy, right? Like, legendary. I mean, and it was legendary. And it's all things that like now you look back on, you're like, oh, it's been like people have done that. Like no one had done that before, you know? So you were probably like, really at like cutting the edge, you know, on that side.
I mean, I give the guys credit and, you know, Guy credit. You know, it was the first time that I think I had ever been around business guys that just like thought in like these wild, creative, you know, sort of controversial ways. Like they were considering sort of all different angles, all different moves. It was all, you know, how are we sort of building, you know, on this momentum that was happening. And the idea that like the two biggest NFTs, you know, in the space at the time, obviously the legendary and the legacy punks and like the new age apes, like the idea that, you know, apes could essentially own the brand. Would you have predicted that?
I would not have. No. Yeah. I remember we were like, everyone was shocked. Right? Yeah.
I was worried it was going to leak. I'll be honest. You know, when you're doing a deal like that from those earliest days, you know, at law firms, you're just like, you're just trying to be so careful to make sure that like, there's not someone that's on the email that shouldn't have been. Right. You never say anything that you shouldn't have. And thankfully it didn't.
Yeah, yeah. And like what were some other, that's pretty interesting to think about, because like the Web3 world is so fast paced. It moves so quick. Everything changes, and like we were talking about it earlier. It's like, seconds can make the difference between like fortunes won, fortunes lost. Things travel fast, rumors, move markets, all this stuff. What was it like to navigate that at like obviously, Fenwick has done a lot of work in crypto, but it's still a big law firm, like that. Yeah.
I think we were all figuring it out, in real time. Andy, I'm sure had figured it out many times over, but we as lawyers had to, we have our own ethical obligations.
Right.
We have sort of business practices. Like you're trying to figure out like, how are you supporting your clients, particularly clients where they're, what they're asking and the things they need to sort of blend between legal and business and just sort of guidance on my understanding of things. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I had a great framework to be like, here's my roadmap, someone else use it.
Right.
I think it really came down to like, how do you make good judgment calls?
Yeah.
And thankfully working, clearly I was working with clients who had made really good judgment calls themselves in terms of like, Greg leaving his book editing job, to do this, or Wiley just sending that first text of like, want to do an NFT project. Like they made judgment calls for them, and I just tried to be a good supporter for it.
What was like, I'm sure that you got to know the guys better, obviously, during that period working with them.
Sure.
What was kind of like your first impressions? Any like kind of interesting stories from the early days with them?
I mean, I think like you guys, anyone from the outside wouldn't have known them. And so like, I had a sense of like what they looked like then.
Yeah.
But, they were obviously like really thoughtful about, they had been careful, with creating pseudonyms. Like they felt like that was important to the project. And also in crypto, we knew at the time you wanted to be careful with your identity. There was a lot of bad actors on, on chain. And so I appreciate that they were cautious about also like letting anyone in, that until they really, prove themselves. And so it took a long time, like of being, a outside, supporter of theirs. And also demonstrating how seriously we took that. We weren't out there being like, hey, we represent Yuga. Hey, we represent the apes. Like we were doing a lot of work behind the scenes and just demonstrating that like we cared about how they could be successful in a safe way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm curious because you got to kind of like the front row seat to all of that, and that rise. Like, what do you think it was that really differentiated them? Because now we look back, it almost seems like a foregone conclusion. Bored Ape Yacht Club, the rise of Yuga, but at that time there were many projects. Like, but that's why so many people didn't even know that apes were going to take off the way they did. Like, what do you think really distinguished them? What do you think contributed like the biggest drivers of their success?
I think, first you got to give, them credit, like, Gordon and Garga are like, it's just that 1-2 punch. There's so many famous versions of that, in history, Walt Disney with his brother, you got Warren Buffett and Charlie, like there's so many, there's been books written about sort of management philosophies of having one visionary and one operator. Like they just hit that, they had that perfect sort of fit. And so, for every big idea, that they'd come up with, they had this great way of refining it together and sort of molding it until it became something. Even the idea for the Bored Ape Yacht Club, Greg talks about, when Wiley shared the idea, how they sort of came to it. So I think we can't ignore like the human, like the component that like they worked really hard and used all these skills they had as writers and editors and creatives to bring it to life. I think they kind of saw something, I've talked to them a bunch. I know they've talked about it publicly. Like they came from the internet, growing up. They were gamers online. They made friends. They created communities, and they had a really clear understanding that like a lot of us flock to the internet because like it's a place for connection. And NFTs of the old like didn't really add much other than like this very sort of thin layer of like you can buy this image. And so they had that idea to be like one of the first that says like this image is more than just an image. It comes with utility. It comes with this activation, the bathroom, right? It came with merch, it came with experiences, and it also came with like a digital identity. And they encouraged, people to really lean into that identity. And I don't know if a lot of collections outside of the early days that, the punks and others where like people assumed identities. I don't know if anyone really sort of promoted that the same way.
That's a great point. All right. So you're at Fenwick, you're working with the Yuga team. How does that turn into you going in-house at Yuga?
It was a crazy time.
Yeah.
And being involved with so many great projects. They were growing, they were raising a ton of money. The ambitions were huge. They were all building a lot of executive teams. And so I was sort of, asked by a couple of clients, like, would you ever consider, joining us? And once I sort of opened that door, I was like, all right, I got to make the right call. And so candidly, I called Nicole and said, and Nicole Muniz, was CEO at the time. I said, hey, Nicole, what do you think? Like, would you want me to join? And they said, we didn't want to break any rules by asking you, but like, we'd love to have you. And so that sort of was it. Like, it just fell right in.
Wow. So when was that you made the jump?
It was May as well. So it was like right after the other deeds, like 2 weeks after I officially sort of joined.
Got it.
Yeah.
What a time.
And then like I flew, and that was like, I like took a job with these guys that I had known for many months, but had never met. And then it was like first day, flew down to like meet them. And there I am, like walking up the street, in Austin, Texas, and Gordon and Garga sitting outside, eating dinner. And I have that very like, hey, I'm Cameron.
Right.
Like, I'm your new guy.
Wow. What was it like? I'm sure it was it was very different to be in-house at like even, like an insurgent Web3, obviously well-capitalized company, but still a very different environment than Fenwick.
Yeah, completely. And I think, in any in-house lawyer that listens to this, will know it. Like your role is a little different, than it is as external counsel. Like you are much more trying to weigh and balance the interest of the company rather than just like the strict sort of legal work. And I'm not saying external counsel doesn't provide, sage guidance and wisdom and business acumen, but in-house, just the calculus is very different. And I think a lot of times in-house lawyers, particularly when you're in early sort of growth stages, you just take on a lot of other functions because you naturally are thinking about issues around ops or finance. And so for me, it was sort of, it was again, that next, iteration of my career where it was like fire hose, like just take it all in. Like the world was moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour.
What were sort of like the early things you started working on in-house there?
Oh, it's a good question. Thinking back, I mean, at that time, like NFTs, it was the height. News stations were talking about it. Celebrities, had bought and were using. You saw businesses trying to get in, and so like, really, I think one of the things was for in supporting the guys was like trying to think about, well, what direction, which of these partners is the right type of partner? Why are they the right type of partner? How do you work with a partner? We were getting calls from sports teams, airlines, clothing companies, travel companies, like everyone, some of those calls were just like, hey, what's an NFT? And you're like, that's a weird way to start this. But, others were like people that had like real sort of big ideas about how they could integrate. And, you're trying to figure out, is that going to be something that's good for the brand?
When you look back at that period where you were, in-house at Yuga, working in that time, what are some of like the standout moments or the things that you, that were really interesting?
Oh, that first Ape Fest, second would be Ape Fest number 2, Ape Fest, in on Pier 17. It really felt like I was a month on the job. The team was growing. It was like the first time we all got to be together in New York. We had those 4 days of just like the best concert. I mean, I know NFT NYC was happening, but like, what Yuga was doing there was just, over the top. And it was also the first one that I think like the community came out in mass. That first Ape Fest, I don't know if you were there.
I DJ'd it.
Oh, you did?
I opened for James Murphy on the boat, and I opened for the Strokes at Brooklyn Steel.
No,
yeah.
I don't think I ever knew that.
That's actually how I first met the guys was, I think the first time I met Garga, he was really worried that James Murphy wasn't going to make the boat. So he was like, hey, can you play all night if we need you to? And I was like, yeah, I got you.
So you might've known his identity before I did that.
Yeah, it was Sass was like my main contact there at the time. He was the one who booked me. And it's funny because, then like Guy Osiri took over, right? And I think he like totally changed the face of all the plans for Ape Fest. And I think I was the only artist who didn't get kill feed, mostly because the guys were like, yeah, we like you.
Hey, that works.
Yeah. Also, they weren't paying me that much, it was like very reasonable, doing it for the community.
Absolutely. But it's like, that was like, on the boat, and then obviously the warehouse party, like, there was a lot of people, but it was kind of a, if you know, moment.
Yeah, it was.
The 2022 in New York was like, NFTs were riding high. They were popular globally. People were so excited to travel. And my memory was like, I can see like all these people coming up to each other, and there's that sort of like, you're so-and-so,
yeah,
right? Or there was like a lot of
to the
people,
name, the buttons,
or shirts. Like people were basically trying to express like who they were in the real world for the first time, and like that was the coolest thing. And then like you got to be a part of those conversations. That was the first year that everyone actually got to meet the founders.
Yeah.
So I remember, I don't think Gordon, I think he stood in one place like for 4 straight days, and just like it was never moved, because people just were sort of always there. And like you had that moment being like, this is real. There's extraordinary passion. There's energy. There's people that are really building and supporting here. Like, we're going to do something big.
Yeah, I remember that really well, because it was that first NFT NYC, when everything was rising. I mean, I know there were ones before, but the first one since like the real boom, when that first Ape Fest happened, like it was like a reunion, or not even a reunion. It was everybody meeting for the first time that had like, they had met on Twitter Spaces or Clubhouse or whatever, in Discord or whatever, and it was like everybody coming together for the first time. The energy was really, really amazing. And it was also like you said, it's one thing to see, okay, I'm on Discord, this Discord call, this many cartoon apes. It's another thing to see all the people to come together. That energy hits different, right?
There's like 3,500 people, like 4 nights in a row. We took over the area outside Pier 17. It was like the first time we saw the IP really playing up. Like Bored and Hungry had a food truck outside. Great burgers, to be honest. Like, yeah, you really sort of felt like the idea that there could be a central brand that people really felt a kinship to, and then they could build on top of it, and they can grow it, either from an identity layer or from a business layer. I think you felt for the first time it in real life.
Absolutely. And that second Ape Fest, obviously they leveled it up, and Eminem, Snoop Dogg, all that was crazy. Yeah.
Being able to like work with their teams, and hearing about like the music video that they were going to do, and obviously Snoop with like Dr. Bombay, like he's turned that into like a huge machine. They got incredible business around that. But hearing that, being able to like call my friends and be like, hey guys, like no alpha, but like working with some big musicians, they're going to make a music video about this random JPEG company I work for that you make fun of. That like you a little bit of fun rubbing it in their face for sure.
Totally. Okay, so Ape Fest, obviously a highlight. I know you were also involved on some of the more challenging moments, right, for Yuga during that time, like the Ryder Ripps saga, etc. Like, from what you can tell us, like what was that like?
Yeah, we filed that lawsuit at, I think, like the day or a couple days after. I was going to Ape Fest at night and like working with the legal team during the day to get that ready, because I'm sure someone's gonna, attack me on Twitter over it, but like, you can't let people steal from you. You can't let people scam you. You can't let people, scam your community. Like, and that's what they were doing. Like, and, thankfully, we can obviously talk about, it between 2022 and now, but like basically at every stage, courts across, the spectrum have agreed with us. Like, this is a scam. You are thieves. You should pay that price. And I think there's like all these people on the internet that are like, oh, but it's the internet. You can do what you want. It's like, no, you can't. We're building a brand. You should pay.
What was the, I remember that fateful image of like, the guys walking, flanked with the legal team. Obviously you're in that, but it was a real, I mean, it was obviously adversarial. It was very public, and it also dealt with legal topics in a new and emerging tech field, a new frontier that are being tested, that are being argued for the first times in some ways. What was that like, from like to kind of bridge, your background in the legal side to like the front lines of it?
I mean, it's always great to be like, it's exciting to be part of something that like is a challenge. It's exciting to be a part of something that like you're passionate about, and being part of the company. I wanted to win because I cared about the company. I also cared about all the people that I knew were being, scammed by this. And at the end of the day, it is a moment where you're like, this is my job and I want to prove that I'm really good at it. And what's funny is you bring up sort of, yes, we're in an emerging field, but like the legal issues really weren't emerging at all. Like, these are well settled, they are essentially the core of trademark law, which is like, if you confuse people about who they're buying something from or whether the thing is affiliated with a company, then it's illegal and you should pay the price for that. And I mean, that's every time that, those guys and their lawyers, who I have plenty of choice words for, try and argue that this is some novel case and there should be new understandings of the law. Every court has just come back to be like, no, it's very simple. You made it intentionally look like this was the Bored Ape Yacht Club. You made $1.3 million convincing people of that, and you should pay that price. And that's a $9 million price tag because they just wouldn't own up. They didn't want to look in the mirror and be like, yeah, we were scamming and we got caught. They still don't.
Yeah. Obviously I know that there are some recent developments there. What do you kind of see as the lay of the land and the path forward there?
Yeah. I mean, between sort of then and now, they filed motion to dismiss, they lost. They appealed that, they lost. They tried to, get out of discovery. With discovery, for anyone who's not familiar, is basically like where both sides of the legal case have to share information. You ask questions of each other, you share documents. They tried to hide all of these, communications where they were basically admitting, saying, they knew what they were doing. And, we got all those. We got, one of their 4 conspirators to just admit it. And, Tom Lehman's declaration is out there. We went to try, we filed for motion for summary judgment, which is essentially where you say to the court, this doesn't even need to go to a jury. There doesn't need to be a trial about this. Like, it's so clear. The law is in our favor. The judge agreed. We then went to a trial just to determine how much money we would win. We won every penny that they had stolen from people. Then we went to post-trial and said they were so bad and they were so deliberate and they were so intentional that we should get our legal fees covered. $6 million or $8 million of our legal fees were covered. I mean, we have won at every step. Most recently, the Ninth Circuit has said, hey, look, that summary judgment, might have been a little premature. There was a couple of things that the judge didn't at least demonstrate that he had considered. We're going to send it back to that judge. Now, look, everyone on the internet's like, oh my God, Yuga lost the case. It's like, no. All that means is that, the judge has to just reconsider a couple of points and we're going to prevail. I will say that right now. I stake my career on it. Like, we are going to prevail. They'll try and get out of it. They'll try and twist it however they want. But like, Yuga's going to win this trademark suit, and nothing has changed about that.
Boom. And obviously this was all against, like I said, a very public backdrop where, there was attacks, there was misinformation, there was all of this kind of like swirling around it. What was that like to navigate?
The internet can be a tough place. You've been in the game for a long time. Like, anyone who wants to paint certain pictures, can use the internet's a tool in that way. And there's a lot of people that go, online just to be, sort of, harmful and hurtful. Like, they think it's funny or fun, or they don't care about the effects. And I think there's a lot of people that, gravitated towards that. They didn't like the success of Yuga. They didn't like NFTs maybe. They wanted to hurt the company. And so, some people, piled on that, but you can't, when you're running a company, like, you can't worry about that. You make decisions. You have a great legal team. You have great counsel at Fenwick working on it. Like, after that, you sort of just move on. As a business, you let the lawyers handle their business and you run your company. Boom.
So how do we go from this era to the ApeCoin and the ApeChain era? So I know you'd been working with Yuga through the launch of ApeCoin, all of that. But when did you start to get more involved there? When did that path become clear that, there's a bigger role for you there?
Yeah, I think, Yuga had always taken the approach, given sort of, the gray landscape, that turned really dark, under the last regime, SEC regime. So we always took the approach of like, okay, like, the community, is in control. The community can make decisions. The community did. I mean, it's kind of interesting, like the ApeCoin DAO, for all of its complaints, like, it was one of the more functioning DAOs over that generation. And we could talk about if DAOs are the right move, but like, they had, I think, 580 proposals put up for vote. There's a couple hundred that passed, a lot had been spent, sometimes maybe not the right things spent on, sometimes, maybe not the right amounts, but the activity was huge. But as we saw, like, the industry evolve, And we saw, the scaling solutions start to come to be where you could actually sort of create, networks that were really sort of focused on specific communities. As we started to see like a lot of people just disregarding, the decentralization component of crypto and just saying, we are going to run a token and we're going to sell it. You start to have to think about like, well, what's the best thing, for ApeCoin? And so that started, with developing ApeChain, which is a scaling solution that, operates on ApeCoin, and launching that and seeing the massive amount of energy in response to that. And then launching like an investment program on top of it and saying, okay, how are we going to reinvest into it? And I was lucky enough to be part of the ApeChain launch. And I was really lucky to be one of the 5 people that were sort of sitting on this investment committee. And we had a good vantage point to seeing like what was going well about ApeChain, what was not, where was the limitations of the DAO, coming into play. And that ultimately led to a proposal to actually hire somebody as CEO of the DAO and give them, more of an executive authority. At that point, Garga and I had, some conversations, and I expressed like a lot of my work was already there. I felt like I had a really clear understanding of what the community needed or how we could build successfully. And I thought like it would be a good transition where I could be a really good bridge, knowing all I know about Yuga, having such a good relationship with Garga and Figgy and, all the guys. And I could just be on the other side, trying to work towards similar goals. He's put a lot of trust in me for a lot of years. I put a lot of trust into him. And that was another moment where he said, I think you're the right guy for the job, and all the different people voting, agreed. So appreciated it.
Absolutely. What was it like stepping into that role? Because it's different, obviously, chief legal officer, chief business officer, these are very important, like these are big roles, but CEO is a different ballgame, right?
Yeah, you definitely learn when you're head honcho. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you haven't already experienced. Thankfully, I probably should be asking you.
It's a learning process every day, right?
That's exactly it. And I took the job, I joke like most people when they're about to have a kid don't make big life changes. And there I was 30 days out from having a kid, going to my wife and being like, I've got an idea. And thankfully she's just, so wonderful and was like, I support you. We've made all these big decisions together. And she said, I support you. We'll figure it out. And so I stepped in knowing that I had to make like a lot of changes really quick because I would have to take a break and make sure that we were like set up for success during that period. And so, my sort of right and left hand, One and Wabam, we worked really hard. We had like a 45-day plan. It got cut down to only 32.
As it does, yeah.
My little girl showed up a little early, but like, we made a lot of progress to sort of change how we think about spend, build out a team, formulate strategy. And when I left, for paternity leave, like I just felt really good about the path, and they did a great job leading the team. And, now that I'm back, from leave, like it feels like we're really starting to hum.
Yeah, no, I know there's been a lot of developments, a lot of initiatives. Obviously, one of the biggest, I think like headline grabbing moves was the proposal to sunset the ApeCoin DAO, which I know Garga, was a big proponent of, submitted that proposal, passed almost unanimously, overwhelming support. But tell us a little bit about that and what the significance of that shift is.
I think this goes back to something we were talking about earlier, where do you sort of put the credit for all the success, of a company that in an industry where a lot of people have raised money and failed pretty quickly and just quietly gone away or just whatever, Garga has just stayed true to just believing in building, methodically. And I sort of said earlier, like, he and Gordo are guys that just have like really clear vision of like, how do you get steps ahead? And so, when the idea was brought up and, he, indicated he was like really, believed in this, you say to yourself, like, like I said, I put a lot of trust in him for a lot of years. Like you got to trust. And I think the community did, right? I mean, I think, what was it? 99.9% approval. And ultimately all that, what that did was it set us on an even playing field with our peers. A lot of peers in last year have just completely said, I'm going to run, the ecosystem as a company. And that's a much faster, much more nimble, much more agile process. And setting up ApeCo, under Garga's, vision is giving us that same capability.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. We chatted a little bit about. I wrote a piece, last week around brand coins,
Yeah.
and we talked about how, in some ways, Ape was kind of the forerunner of that.
Sure.
Ape launched at a different time, a very different time, very different regulatory regime. Couldn't have been like night and day, right? Like Gary Gensler was on the warpath, whereas now we have the most crypto-friendly administration ever. I'd love it, like that prism of sort of for perspective. Why was, we'll talk about the DAO elements. Like, why did ApeCoin launch the way it did at the time it did, from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I mean, from even before the legal side, it's like you're sort of bringing up, it was a different era. Like I mean, I remember all of the thought pieces around DAOs were the future, and decentralized decision making was the future. And there was the SEC sort of set everyone on this path. In 2019, I think, or 2018, they put out like that framework for digital assets, and it was like this 79 prong test where you were trying to figure out how decentralized something was, and so everyone ran after that, saying, okay, if that's the test, you follow that. And that led to a lot of people saying, well, actually, not only is this the test, it's a good thing. People can make, we can basically figure out everyone's opinion and then decide the right thing. And so at the time, Yuga being, successful coming out of that 2021 cycle, you were just looking at what was the best ideas in the moment, and what do we think was going to succeed. And so, I think the Ape Foundation and ApeCoin DAO like did some of the best, of DAOs, but it also is showing exactly why DAOs have failed in large part. Move too slow, can't get decisions. You run into economic sort of, disproportionate control issues, like a lot of things that you might not have been able to foresee. So that's why I think we've seen a lot of DAOs migrate, including, ApeCoin DAO, out of a DAO cycle into, a much more corporate, structure.
And now with ApeCo and all of that, do you feel like essentially ApeCoin is more aligned now with all of Yuga's brand priorities?
Absolutely. I mean, in that proposal that Garga put up, it was really clear. It was like, ApeCoin and ApeChain's mission is going to be, supporting the club, BAYC, supporting Other Side, which we should talk about because, Figgy has just been crushing it, and the future's looking bright. And it's going to continue to support ApeChain. And underneath all that is always going to be ApeCoin.
Yeah. Well, why don't we talk a little about Other Side?
Yeah.
What are you most excited about there, and how do you see ApeCoin and ApeChain like playing a significant role in that ecosystem?
For sure. Well, I mean, really easy. Other Side's powered by ApeChain, right? ApeChain is super fast, super inexpensive. It makes the blockchain usable at scale. And so Other Side has grand ambitions. We've said it. We want to go take on Roblox, right? $80 billion company. You got to set your sights high if you believe in yourself. But to be at that scale, you need to be moving at light speed. And thankfully, ApeChain, can do that. And ApeCoin is going to be the currency layer of all that. But man, I am stoked about Other Side. And I'm not even a gamer, like, but I am stoked. Like it accomplishes a couple of things. Like one, we both got into Web3 at a time where the promises were like no walls and everything's gonna be open garden. And yet ironically, you get stuck behind chain walls or community tribalism. And Other Side's now a platform where like all that sort of comes back down. And we're like, any community can build here. Any developer can build here. Like you can build sort of what you want. And that's something that like the Web2 world, the Robloxes of the world, the Fortnites of the world, like can't really do or don't do today. But to me, it's like what's been so exciting is just how like socially oriented it's been. People are, I'm sure you spend a lot of time on spaces or, in group chats, and it's like, yeah, it feels kind of thin sometimes. Like I'm both watching TV and on spaces, and I'm like trying to like fill some sort of, interaction void that like just talking to my phone doesn't really do. And all of a sudden you jump into Other Side, you jump into a bubble, and there's 50 of like kind of your closest friends. And for whatever reason, that visual connection just it holds my attention much better. And we've seen like just without much prompting, like the hundreds of community members just come together like daily and just like play games and hang out. And they're migrating from spaces to do it. And so Other Side has this huge potential just to be a social layer of the internet, even before we get to a commerce layer or a gaming layer.
I like that. And then how do you see, obviously we talked about ApeChain powering all that and all that, but, ApeCoin as a currency within the game, like what are some of the things that you see most compelling there?
Yeah, I mean, when we were talking about the article you put out, I mean, I said the goal here is to get millions of people to spend billions in Ape in Otherside. And so, our goal is, one, we want to make Otherside as simple as you possibly can. So you don't have to know how to buy ApeCoin or how to buy Ethereum or get gas or any of that. The goal is to basically make it so that any user can just pay and we'll handle the back end. But, anyone who holds Ape, certainly wants the same thing, which is like, we want there to be a lot of transaction in ApeCoin, and Otherside will make sure all transactions flow that way.
That's cool. And obviously there's a lot of just builder energy on ApeChain.
Yeah.
A lot of projects launching. What are some, like when you look at sort of the ApeChain builder landscape, like what are some of the highlights? What are some of the standout things that are being built there?
For sure. I mean, I think for us, one of the earliest things we focused on was like, how do you want to build a foundation for a chain? You can definitely go out and just seek out individual projects. For us, it was like, we want to build a really sticky, a really loyal foundation. And so we went out and targeted, how do you build the best NFT communities? Because kind of the same reason that you and I are even having this conversation, like we found NFT communities, it drew us into this industry. And there's a lot of people who weren't in the 2021 cycle. They're now getting into crypto and they're trying to find themselves. And so we wanted ApeChain to really be that home of NFTs, where like that same thing that made apes feel special, the same thing that punks feel special. We wanted there to be new communities of that, even if the price wasn't going to be, whatever our floor prices are today. And so we've got, I forget what it is, like 200 active NFT communities on ApeChain. And like, what's so amazing is once you have that loyal foundation, like their energy to build for themselves and for others just sort of goes off the charts. So we've got a ton of communities building, mobile games. We've got communities building casinos, or maybe, I don't know if they'll be legally casinos, but, degen stuff.
Yeah.
We've got a ton that are sort of, building models so that they'll be ready for Otherside so they can jump on in and be part of that culture. And so like that energy, I think, is infectious. And then on the other side, we also think a lot about like, okay, how do you demonstrate what you want ApeChain to be in a bigger way? And so we've started to build products, particularly in the sports and music and entertainment and sort of culture space, that will live on ApeChain, that we think are going to be really good signals for like what the next generation of on-chain activity can be. So I was just trying to get you to come out to ApeFest in October. I pitched you on ComplexCon, right? We get to be the first partner of ComplexCon. We're putting the whole thing on chain, so that when you're there, you are actually participating on chain. That's the kind of stuff that bridges that Web 2 culture into a Web 3 technology.
Yeah, I know we've talked a little bit about this, one-on-one as well, but, obviously, collaborating with Jeff Staples, the ComplexCon, like there's definitely an interesting element of like bridging that element of culture, the streetwear culture, the, collectibles culture, all of that with all that you're doing at ApeChain. How do you kind of see the two working together?
Yeah, I think we want to encourage all of those experiences that have happened historically, either in real life or are digital, but are fragmented. We want to encourage them to come together. And that's kind of what the blockchain is actually really made for, is, data being, recorded and then leveraged. And so part of our conversation with a lot of these partners is, the depth that you can go with your consumers, your users, and the way that you can target and find similar users is just a heck of a lot stronger on the blockchain. And in addition to sort of using it as, an engagement layer, or a user acquisition layer, you can use it as an engagement layer. You're able to interact more freely and more directly with consumers using blockchain, right? If you drop a POAP or, an NFT, like you can target every user going forward in like a positive way, not spamming them with emails or text messages that like they don't want. You can be actually communicating, with them directly about things they do want. And so, for us, when we talk to partners like that, you do see the eyes wide open moment where they're realizing like all those middlemen they've had to go through, the ad agencies and the SEO, and SEM companies, like maybe that's no longer needed. in the future when we're all sitting on the same rails.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And so, what are the biggest challenges you think that ApeChain faces right now?
Yeah, like any chain, right? Our industry is still a small one in the grand scheme. Yeah, like we have institutional adoption happening on like the Bitcoin side and ETH side. But on like the actual activity side, there's just industry wide, there's been struggles. GameFi has struggled. SocialFi hasn't found its footing. InfoFi is in its early days.
Yeah.
I mean, I follow you, and so you can have all my Cato points, but like I think we're all still trying to figure out what is the good version of the capabilities and what is sort of the short term or maybe even the negative version. But with that comes like it's hard to get eyeballs. It's hard to get consistent attention. And I think there's some chains that are doing a great job of it. I think we've done a great job with like a really loyal community, but it takes a lot of effort and a lot of creativity to be able to capture new eyeballs every day, and that's the challenge.
Yeah, the attention economy is hard. It's really hard, right? But it dictates. I always say like where attention goes, liquidity flows in this ecosystem. Yeah.
I need Alejandro to tell me how you guys are getting your your newsletter conversion rate. I need to figure out how to do that. In crypto, man.
Yeah, no, for real. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting there is like, I always say it's like show me the results, show me the incentives, right? And it's interesting how you can use crypto native incentives to sort of hack things, but then like at a certain point, you can only play that playbook so much. You actually have to be providing consistent quality, right? Like that's been our MO over, we started in 2021, right? So we've been doing this now for more than 4 years. It's like that consistency and that quality, that's what we become synonymous with.
At some point it comes to roost, and if you've been making promises and if you're dangling that carrot for too long, you lose attention. If the carrot isn't as big or doesn't taste as good as people wanted, you'll lose attention. To your point, you got to be able to actually give people something they care about. And, for us, like I think, on the Yuga side, that's people are still part of the club for that exact reason. They still feel that what they get for being part of the club matters 4 years later. We're going to have a couple thousand apes from around the world fly, to Vegas for Ape Fest, in October this is going to be number 5.
Wow. Yeah.
There's still active communities globally, and on ApeChain, you're starting to see that propagate in its own. So, I'm with you that it's like, you got to be able to cut out the noise and demonstrate that like you are one of the bright spots people can actually, believe in, and then be validated, to go back to something we were saying before. But, like we said, that's a challenge you got to face every day. You actually got to work at.
Totally. And we've talked a bit about this too. Obviously, it's a competitive landscape out there. You've got other projects like Abstract, like Anime, like some of these other ones that are also kind of coming from the NFT native community, building things that, could be seen as competitive. Like, how do you kind of look at this landscape, and where do you feel ApeChain sits within it and has like really sets itself apart?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all too small. Like, this industry is too small for us to be saying, you're my peer, you're my competitor, I have to take your market share. I think, we have such opportunities, all of us, to go out and grow in our own ways. And I think when we were talking about the brand coin thing, there was the question of sort of how do we differentiate? And I said, well, our sort of go to market, is a digital distribution effort, while others are focusing on a physical distribution effort, or some are focusing on a vertical that they're going both physical and digital. And so I think ApeChain, as it now is centering around sort of that vibe and ethos of BAYC and other side, it'll continue to stand out in the ways that it really distributes digitally, these just really incredible experiences and opportunities, whether that's in other side or out. And I think like, if we sat back down next year, like I think the pie is just bigger. I think we're all going to grow. And honestly, that's what I want. Like, I'm not here to hope that one of my, classmates from 2022 shuts down or loses this year. That'd be bad.
Yeah. No, it's like when the waters rise, so do all the ships. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's zoom out a little bit too. Like, we're obviously you've been in crypto now for a minute. When you think back, you got multiple cycles at least under the belt. Like, where do you think we are, and where do you think the market goes from here?
Such a good question. I'm trying to make those buys every day, right?
Yeah.
You can only really ever vote with your money. I mean, I think we're not in a retail cycle yet. We are in an institutional cycle. And I'm definitely not the first one to say that. So whoever did say it first, I'm probably stealing it from you, and I appreciate it. so we saw sort of, you look at that, the normal product curve, like we've seen the early adopters, sort of come through. Now we're sort of seeing the institutional adoption, which I think will hopefully lead to the retail adoption. But I think the reason we haven't yet is like the products themselves are still not yet what retail expects of their experiences, their activations, where they spend their money. And I think it's really incumbent on us to figure that out. Like either we get to the level that people want to use the things we're building, or like we have to stop saying retail is coming. They may always come and buy tokens because like markets will get more liquid and whatever, but like that's not what many businesses in crypto even are in. The token business, I think a lot of token companies will get beaten up when Wall Street traders come, because they are really good at trading assets, and brands are not that great at controlling asset trading. So I think for retail to come, which is good for all of us, we got to build better stuff.
And given like your background in corporate law and just like the business side of things, what are your thoughts on like the rise of the treasury companies that we're seeing, and like how do you think that whole thing ends?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because to me it demonstrates that there's a lot of money that's been on the sidelines that for various reasons, either regulatory or accounting, or governance reasons, like couldn't get in. And so they, it does validate like that there's a lot of interest about the industry we're in. And it does validate that like the flywheels, the tokenomic flywheels we've all tried to create, has some basis. But I think at the same time, like you have to ask yourself the question of what is sort of the underpinning thesis here. I think when you're talking about Bitcoin or Ethereum or some of those where you're at global level adoption, both institutional and retail, makes a lot of sense. Where you're, at a place where the token sort of hasn't hit that exit velocity, to me, it feels like on shakier ground, and you're going to end up having to continue raising money to buy the token just to keep it holding. And at some point, I think that investment thesis gets really hard for fresh capital. We're seeing even conversations. I saw some rumor that like BlackRock's going to fork Bitcoin because Saylor has too much Bitcoin. That's only 3%. What starts to happen when a treasury company's got 48% of a token? Like, not so sure people are going to keep buying. So it'll be really interesting to see how it plays out. But the big boys, I think it's a great thing for the market.
Absolutely. It's interesting too, like you mentioned it, we're not in a retail cycle yet. Obviously the NFT boom, there was certainly like a major retail component of that, and Bored Apes were arguably the face of it, right? Which I think in some ways is a blessing, and in other ways it can be a bit of a curse as well, right? Like, how, as you've been navigating sort of the business conversations around the future of ApeChain and the like how do you feel the perception of apes and that brand and the NFT association, how has that been sort of a challenge, or has that also been something that has helped?
I think companies, whenever there's sort of cycles that seem like fads, or they're unsure of whether something's a fad, there's definitely skepticism. There was skepticism in 2022. There's certainly skepticism during the bear, but lo and behold, when the markets sort of turn, they all start coming back. And like, that is for sure true. I not going to give alpha here, but like, there's plenty of really exciting conversations with, brand names that people would, want to know that like we're having. Does that mean we're going to land everyone? No, of course not. But do I believe that like our thesis of, if we create the right environment for brands to start to leverage the blockchain to acquire users, to engage, to more deeply engage and to create just more enriching experiences, do I think that pitch is going to work? Like, hell yeah, I do. And I think we got some really good partners. On the club side, like I said, like I think we're in a place where the club is going to continue to sort of roll forward. There's just such deep conviction over it. Greg's got, he's talked about, finishing the roadmap, getting the clubhouse, and sort of making that loop, sort of clear. And I just think that will always exist regardless of market perception. Apes are always going to be apes.
Yeah. And, one thing I'm interested to get your perspective on as well is obviously, on the Yuga side, they've significantly narrowed the focus. Obviously, selling CryptoPunks off to the Node Foundation, Meebits to Sergito, Moonbirds to Spencer. being able to really hone in there, does it feel different in terms of working with Yuga in that regard?
For sure. They're lighter, they're faster, they're the teams are just more focused, day in and day out. But I just want to like give credit to the Yuga team, Garga and Figgy and all the guys. Like, there's been plenty of people who've come over the years and been like, oh, would you ever make a move on this brand or that brand? But like Garga's talked about, you got to find the right partner in all these. And the success of Moonbirds is the success of Yuga. Yuga's an owner, right? Ape is an owner, right? The success of Meebits, same thing. Yuga wants it to succeed because it, has a stake in the upside. Ape has a stake in the upside. So finding those partners, like, I think that's kind of like part of the genius of it. Like, and those two guys particularly, we haven't even talked about the Node Foundation, which is, such an amazing sort of thesis and moment. I think Spencer and Sergito are like, they're just two of the best builders in the space, and to be close partners with them and be able to, to win when they win. I mean, every ape's got to be excited about that.
Absolutely. On a personal note, obviously, you became a father over the past year. You had the paternity leave, et cetera. How has that changed your perspective, and changed you as a person?
I definitely think more about like, is this an NFT I should buy for her, or me? But I mean, I just feel so lucky for, becoming a dad or getting ready to become a dad. People always tell you that it's going to change your life and you won't really understand until it happens. And like, it does. And I don't have any better words for it than anyone else has said. I just know that, in the mornings, like I get to pick her up and like her first thing to do is smile at me. And I'm like, the world can't be that bad today. Like, my daughter smiles at me still. So I just feel super lucky. It's, I wish I had better words.
Do you find is it challenging to balance early parenthood and I mean, so, no kids here, but my co-founder has 2 kids and my CTO has 2 kids. So I have an insight into it. It's how do you sort of like do the balancing act?
My daughter has definitely perked up on some Twitter spaces, and my 2, left hand, right hand, one in Wabam, like, they'll hear like I am often just feeding her and working. Like, I think, look, women have been doing this for generations. Like, if I can't hack it, to do some feeds and carry her around if she's upset, and be committed and consistent in being a good partner in that way, then like, shouldn't become a dad. Like, it's just my honest belief. My wife, does such an insane job supporting me, and like, it's not on her to raise our kid alone. And I feel super strongly about that. I'm sure there's people who disagree with me. But like, I'd much rather know that on a daily basis, I got to interact with my little girl and I got to be a part of raising her, rather than like, oh, she turned out pretty good.
No, I love that. And zooming out again, as we think about just everything that's to come, what are you most excited about for the future of Ape? And anything that you can hint at? We do love the alpha, so anything that you can speak to that's exciting on the run.
How long until this comes out?
There's flexibility there. We can figure that out.
Yeah, I think
we can also edit if need be.
Look, I think I said other side. I'm so excited for it. It's not just because the tech is cool. It's not just because the art and visuals are great. Like, the stuff that Figgy and Greg have cooked up with partners, with, builds themselves, I think is really going to melt faces, whether that happens tomorrow or, in the future, I won't say. So other side, I think, is just such a game-changing platform for all of crypto, that there's a place that anyone can build and experience and sort of cross-pollinate. Tons of collections are coming to us saying, when can we get into other side? So that's super killer. And yeah, I've sort of teased it a couple of times on the timeline. I don't know if I can share much more, but like, we're working with some really great partners to build, to really change the, how you can think about interacting with sports, athletes and identity around athletes, and similar in the music space. How do you actually, activate in real life, with musicians? And so, being able to sort of do these things that people do every day and want to be a part of, social media has created parasocial relationships with all these people. Being able to think about what does that look like in an on-chain world, like, man, future's bright.
There it is. Well, before we sign off, for Juan and with Bam, we got to do a little bit of like Philly sports predictions, right? Yeah. What do we got coming? What are the Phillies for real, or what are the Eagles going to repeat? Like, what are we looking at?
I mean, I think Phillies are winning the series this year. Eagles 2-peat Dallas still sucks. That's all I can say.
I mean, as a Bills fan, you know, Dallas sucking is something I can get behind.
Yeah, Micah
so.
Parsons, you'll never hear this, but I'm a Penn State fan. Come home, my friend. Jerry doesn't like you. Come sign in Philly. We'll do it together.
There it is. Well, Cam, appreciate you taking the time. Great conversation, and excited for everything that's to come on the Ape front.
Thank you guys so much. It was a pleasure to be here.
On to the really important matters. Tell me about the cheesesteaks. Like, what's your favorite? Where's the spot?
So my favorite is D'Alessandro's. It's one of those ones that's like been around for 70 years, and it's like, the rumor is like they never clean the cooktop. Okay. So like the flavor you get feels like you're eating off of like that 70 years of just cheesesteak cooking.
Accumulated residue. This is like a history and
oh
taste.
Yeah, I'm eating like with my generations before me of cheesesteak, but it's like super finely chopped. Throw the bun right and the cheese right on, bun on top, slip the spatula under, turn it over, and it's just like, it just is a melt in your mouth good cheesesteak.
Boom.
Yeah.